Reading with your kids.
Hey, so great to see you. Come on in. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are so delighted that you're joining us today. Thank you so much for being part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family. Please be sure to subscribe on the iHeartRadio app, on iTunes, on Spotify, or wherever you find your podcast. We have an amazing guest today, and we have a really amazing and extended conversation with the author of Santiago, True Tales of a Little Bug in a Big World. Our guest's name is Jennifer Vitanzo. This really is an exciting interview with Jennifer Vitanzo. We talk about everything. We talk about her great book, The Tales of a Little Bug in a Big World. We talk about bugs. We talk about music. We talk about traveling. We talk about family. We talk about everything. And before Jennifer comes in, I want to talk about an exciting performance that I would love to invite you to. It's Jedley's Totally Interactive Magic Circus, all part of Rochester Fringe Festival this coming Saturday, September 14th, from 3 to 4 p.m. at the Joseph Avenue Arts and Cultural Alliance. It's on Avenue D, 200 Avenue D in Rochester, New York. It is absolutely free. The folks at the Joseph Avenue Arts and Cultural Alliance have made sure that this program is absolutely free to all families, and we would love for you to come. One of the things I love about this show is that the real stars of the show are the kids and adults in the audience. I use volunteers selected at random from the audience to perform amazing tricks and illusions. Just imagine what some of your neighbors are going to think of when they see one of their neighbors floating in the air. Check it all out. It's Jedley's Totally Interactive Magic Circus as part of Rochester Fringe Festival. Saturday, September 14th at 3 p.m. at the Joseph Avenue Arts and Cultural Alliance, Avenue D Recreation Center. Joining us on the line right now from a beautiful part of the world, Chelsea, Massachusetts. She is the author of Santiago, True Tales of a Little Bug in a Big World. Please welcome to the show, Jennifer Vitanzo. Jennifer, how are you?
I am good. How are you doing today?
I am wonderful. First, I want to thank, I actually have a couple of copies of Santiago in my hands. It's a beautiful book. The reason I have a couple of copies of the book in my hand is that Jennifer was really kind to respond to a request I made for books. One of the folks in my church is the director of a shelter that serves homeless mothers, young homeless mothers. They're mostly teenagers and they have no support. So I thought it'd be really neat if we reached out to some authors and asked for some books so that these young mothers can get into the habit of reading to their kids and hopefully break the cycle of poverty and homelessness. And Jennifer was one of the many authors who responded so quickly to that call. So thank you so much for doing that.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you for supporting them. That's a lot of good work.
Well, I'm excited. Santiago, it's a beautiful book. There's lots of great pictures. Tell us,
Thank you.
In your words, tell us about the book.
So it's actually based on a true story. I spent the last 8 years living and working in conservation in the game reserves in South Africa. And at one time, I ended up bringing in a baby praying mantis on a flower and didn't even realize it and ended up raising it. I'm not exactly really sure why he never left, but he didn't. And I didn't want to put him outside, not knowing much about insects and how I'm great with mammals. I'm great with birds. But when it came to insects, I knew very little except to avoid mosquitoes. So I had this little praying mantis and he just kind of hung out, and then he became a thing, and he sort of became a story, and he became then part of the family because he would sit there with me when I was working, when I wasn't in the field. And then because I'm also a photographer, I would just take photos of him. He'd become part of the campaigns for conservation. So it'd be like Santiago says, don't kill rhino. And it just turned into a thing. And everyone said to me, you really should write a book about this. And at first it was does it become a memoir about my experiences being in a very isolated environment and a very unique environment? I mean, I didn't grow up in anything like that. I grew up in a small town at the Jersey Shore, and going over to South Africa was, it wasn't just going to a new country and a new city. I was going into the middle of nowhere, with things like lions outside my front door and no fences. It was like actually being in the zoo without the walls. Mm-hmm. And so the book just came from that. I mean, I want to almost say that I didn't have to do very much to write it because it really wrote itself. What happened in the book is actually what happened with him. I mean, obviously I took creative liberties because he didn't actually talk to me, but yeah, those were his stories. We really did take him on road trips. I really did fly him from Cape Town to Johannesburg because he'd just become so much a part of the family and had become such a story that I must personally I felt like a mom, in a strange way. Like obviously not as much as you would be for a parent of a kid, but there was still that mothering sense of, I need to protect this, I need to help it, I need to raise it, and the same questions of, am I doing the right thing? Am I causing more problems? How is this animal going to turn out? I was having phone calls with friends of mine, and they were like, you're really stressing out a lot about a bug. And I was like, yeah, but it's, he's a life form, and he'd become part of the family, and it matters. And then I think it just really expanded my view on what it means to raise something and your sense of responsibility for taking care of something, and also the value of smaller things in life that most of the time we either swat away or squish or ignore completely. So that's where it came from, really. It was the whole idea of wanting to shed a light on something that normally, it's insects are normally something that we shy away from, we don't like. Mm-hmm. It's just sort of ingrained in our personality. For the most part, not everybody, but most of us look at insects and they think of bugs as they bug you. That's where the word came from, pretty much. And they're amazing. I mean, all the incredible things that all these small little creatures do that help make the world run, it just gets overlooked or ignored or just, So I wanted to make sure that there was something out there, and I wanted to make sure that people saw him as he was and not do a caricature. Like yes, we have a cartoon in there, but I wanted to make sure that the photos were in there so people could see him for who he was. Because he's a little alien-looking creature, but he's very endearing. And I think the nice thing about praying mantises is something about them, and it's maybe because they have a separate head that sort of swivels around, mm-hmm. that they have sort of almost human qualities to a degree. It's like other bugs, usually their heads are fused to their abdomen, so they can't turn their heads. The praying mantises look around, and it's pretty fascinating to watch them. It's like a very strange looking little human, doing their thing. So, yes, that's a long story.
No, well, you bring up a number of different things. One of the things that I talk with kids a lot about when I'm doing my educational magic shows, one of the things I'll often do is ask kids what they're thankful for. And many times kids will get up and they'll say they're thankful for their pet. And my comment is pets are wonderful because taking care of a pet helps us learn to love something other than ourselves.
Yes. Yes.
And that's so important for little kids because, as you know, we kind of come into the world just loving ourselves and needing and wanting people to take care of us. But I think it takes a long time for a lot of people to learn how to love something other than themselves.
Well, actually, and also something that is so foreign, I think maybe as children, when we're really young, we haven't been indoctrinated to a degree with stuff and like what we can like and what we can't like. And, there isn't a fear of a lot of things that we sort of learn as we get older. Some for obvious reasons, like, we should have a relative healthy fear of anything that, like a snake, but not in the sense that you should just kill a snake when you see it, just in the sense that it could, if it bites, there's a possibility it could be dangerous. Mm-hmm. But the reality being that the likelihood of you running into one it's pretty slim because most of the time they'll actually run away. They're more afraid of us. Mm-hmm. So there's a level and an element to us needing to be more, it's not necessarily a fear, it's just a healthy respect for. Sure. And when it comes to insects, the attitude is kind of just squish them, or they're pests, and we don't want them around, and we sort of shut ourselves away from them. But at the same time, when you have to raise something like that, which is relatively, they're tiny, mm-hmm. so they're relatively delicate. Even something like a tarantula that could inflict quite a bit of pain, or scorpion, they are, although they're technically not bugs, but they're arachnids. Still, same kind of concept, mm-hmm. but It's something that's small. It's something that's relatively delicate in the sense that, we're 100 times larger. We have to, and because we can't communicate with it in the same way. Like having a pet when you're a child or at any age, you really have to sit down and reassess how you communicate, because you can't communicate the same way. They're not going to understand what you're saying. Or if they do, I don't know how to communicate. Like I'm not quite sure how to breach that gap. But for all intents and purposes, they're not hearing the words. They're maybe getting the intonation, but they're not, so, and we don't necessarily fully understand them. So there's that element of having to understand something that is vastly different than you and work with something that is vastly different from you, which I almost feel like is a great lesson, just a life lesson in general of tolerance and understanding and patience. And, because not just with other species, but with other cultures, we're all raised differently. And for me going to South Africa, I dealt with a country where there's 11 official languages and I only spoke one of them. And it's not just a language barrier, but it's also a lot of cultural differences, and being willing to learn those differences and understand how people navigate in their world. It's such a valuable lesson on so many levels. So whether it's a pet or, however it is that you get to that point to learn the tolerance and to learn the acceptance and to learn the understanding, I think it's just, you can't go wrong.
No, and it's a really valuable lesson for us to share with our kids. And, as you're talking about, learning to kind of tolerate and respect the life of an insect, hopefully we're going to be able to, us and our kids are going to be able to translate that into respecting the humanity of all the people that we meet, no matter where they're from, no matter what language they speak.
Exactly. So, and kids too. I mean, kids get I'm the youngest of 5, and we've got a big age gap. And so same parents, but my sisters when I was growing up they left for college when I was 2 years old. And so it was almost like growing up in a different family. And you're always like I was always the little one. I will always be the little one. And there was always kind of a feeling of I didn't qualify. I wasn't kind of good enough because I was small and I was far behind, and I tried desperately to keep up. And I feel like a lot of times we discount, and there are some people that are fantastic about not doing this, but I think there is an overarching feeling of discounting younger people and the value that they bring and their perspectives on things and how they see the world. And I've worked with kids of various ages and various cultures, and I'm always fascinated by the incredible things that they come up with and how they see things. And I think, oh my gosh, that would have never dawned on me. And it's sort of like this youthful exuberance and excitement, and they're not jaded, and or you'd hope they're not jaded yet, but or ever. But yeah, I think kids have voices, and it's so easy to just sort of be like, simmer down, you're not old enough yet, or you're not. But their experiences are just as valid. They're just different,
Sure, absolutely. Now,
so, go ahead.
You've had quite an experience. What brought you from the United States to South Africa to, as you said, living in the jungle?
So my two passions, when I was a kid, my dreams were I was either going to be a big old rock star or I was going to be a photojournalist for National Geographic, two very small goals. And it was I had a difficulty trying to merge the two of them. So while I did work with conservation, I did a lot of work, particularly in writing and photography, I actually ended up doing more work initially with music, and I was a touring singer-songwriter for about 8 years. I toured all over the U.S. I played at the White House. I played at the Kennedy Center. I sang the national anthem at Major League Baseball games. It was a lot of fun, but it was a grind. Mm-hmm. And oddly enough, prepared me very well for working in the bush. There were a lot of parallels between working in the music industry and working in a game reserve in South Africa.
Well, I need to explore that. I don't work in the music industry. My daughter does, and so I'm aware of a lot of that grind. I tour with my magic show, so I'm aware of touring. It's different. Yeah. But I want to know how touring as a musician prepared you to be in the bush.
It's all about adaptability more than anything. It's being able to roll with the punches. You think you have control over something, and then all of a sudden you don't. And I guess it's like life in general. But when you can only, and particularly in music or any entertainment, but as a musician, when you're on a stage, you can control what you do. You cannot control how the audience will receive you. You cannot control what the venue will be like when you're playing. You can't control if there's a thunderstorm and suddenly your power goes out and now you've got to do everything without any of that. Or if, there's a really massive snowstorm and suddenly you can get only 2 people to come to your, there are a lot of things that factor in. And then you have people that, you have some very sort of ruthless people in the industry that take advantage at every opportunity. And it's not that conservation is necessarily in that respect like it, but the element of having to be able to adapt on a whim and always be aware of your circumstances. We call it situational awareness. But it's the same thing as a musician. And as a female touring musician, unfortunately, I had to be very much aware of my surroundings at all times, for better or for worse. And so working out there, when you have wildlife that can be relatively unpredictable, but when you spend time with it, you start to learn behaviors. It's a lot like working with people. You spend time with them, you get to know them, you start to understand their behaviors, and then it becomes a lot easier to work with them, and it's not quite as scary. But you're working in a situation where you're not getting paid a lot. You sometimes can go days without having conveniences of a store nearby or a shack. I mean, I lived in a tent for 6 months, which was, and I lived on the road. I mean, there were times occasionally when I first started out where I actually slept in my car and was just running from place to place. You work really long hours. You don't get a break the way you normally would with a 9-to-5 job. I mean, you don't get weekends. You work straight through. And in the bush, you work on what they call cycles. So you'll literally work 7 days a week for a 6-week to an 8-week cycle. So, Monday through Sunday, and you'll work 14 and 15-hour days, and it's a grind. You're up at 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning, because the best time to deal with wildlife, typically, unless you're doing nocturnal stuff, is right at sunrise or before sunrise, going into sunrise. And then you come back and take a break in the middle of the day because it's too hot. But then you have other things you have to work on, like you're working on upkeep of the vehicle. So it's a lot of DIY stuff, which is a lot of what you do as a musician or a singer, particularly if you're first starting out as well. So I had to learn to change tires. I had to learn, which is, I think everyone should, I think there should be a year in school where everybody you have to learn to do things like change tires. It's a really good skill. But I mean, simple, even just learning, I had to learn how to use a vehicle. Like I had to learn how to change my own oil. I had to learn how to check all of my own, all the fluids in the car. Then you had to, we luckily worked with mechanical cars. So the Land Cruisers and Land Rovers that we had, if you popped that hood, you had to know what everything was and how to manipulate things. Which is, again, when you're on the road, you need to kind of be able to do a lot of these baseline things because you don't have someone that can help you. You're a lot of times either in a band or on your own, but at 2 o'clock in the morning, if you're driving from Austin to Dallas for your next show, and you have a flat tire, you don't really want to be alone on the side of the road, not knowing what to do. There were a lot of those things that oddly enough transferred over. And on top of that, when you work in conservation, you deal with people from a lot of different backgrounds. You've got people that are coming in from all over the world. You've got guests that come and stay at some of the lodges, depending on what reserve you're on and what your job is. You have people with the different NGOs and conservation organizations that are based in other countries. So you have to be able to work well with others, so to speak. And the same thing with the music industry. You have people coming in from a lot of different backgrounds, in a lot of different capacities, and you have to be able to work well with everyone. It was interesting how so many of those experiences translated over, obviously in a different capacity in some respect, but it was very similar.
Well, in addition to probably scaring a lot of people off from the music industry,
it's not all that bad. It's amazing. It is so, I just came back from a festival, playing a folk festival up in the Berkshires, and it was 4 days, 5 days of camping, and it was gorgeous and glorious and an amazing community of people, and it's like family, and there are so many good things that go with it. But it's like anything else. It's like, I think we glamorize these industries because we see all this, the glitz part of it, but we forget that there's the work side of it, which is actually most of it.
Yeah.
And if it's a way to just not necessarily dissuade, because I don't want to dissuade anyone, but I want people to realize that this is the reality behind it.
Well, yeah, I mean,
at least go into it with a healthy sense of understanding of what you're getting yourself into.
Oh, and one of the things that you pointed out too, which is really important, and we've talked to leaders of industry on the show, and they've said kind of the same thing. My daughter, who is in the music industry right now, one of the reasons that she's been able to progress so far in the industry so quickly, she's really young, is the fact that she just gets along with people, and she's respectful, and she's kind, and she's helpful.
Yeah.
And she's had many people that we glamorize and that are on TV that have taken the time at the end of their tour when they've come through Boston, whether it's they're there for a night or for a 3-day stand, and they've just come up to my daughter and given her a hug and said, "You're so kind." It's such a refreshing thing to work with somebody who's so nice and cheerful. And if we can share those qualities with our kids, it can really help them go far in life, no matter what they're doing.
Well, and the thing is too, and I think one of the most amazing things about being in the bush and working with, and having this little bug to raise was, it forced me, because I'd grown up in an environment of everything was go, 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 go. And it's, all about achievement. It's all about, a lot of high stress. And there are elements of that with our culture in general of you must achieve. And to some degree, I think we don't slow down a lot of times enough to really appreciate all the things that are around us. And working in the bush forced me to slow down. I didn't have a choice. I mean, it's not like I could go anywhere. Mm-hmm. So, and there were, spend time really sitting and watching things and feeling like I was a part of something. And there's something really nice about stopping to smell the roses. And sometimes, I mean, quite literally smell the roses. There's so much incredible stuff in this world that a lot of times we take for granted or we just forget.
Yep.
And it's so easy to focus on all the bad stuff. And I know there's a lot of media that glorifies the bad stuff, but there's a lot of amazing stuff as well. And we take I feel like we're happier people when we take the time to realize that and to appreciate it and be grateful for it. Because it's all there. And it doesn't make everything fantastic. It doesn't, clear the ills of the world per se, but I think it would make us all, I think it would go a lot further in making us all just a much calmer, kinder people. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that we can do with a great book like Santiago, after we spend time reading with our kids, is to, you don't need to go to South Africa and live in the bush to kind of appreciate nature and all the creatures that share our world. We can, even if you live in the city, you can go out to a space and be quiet and just observe.
Yes.
And you'd be surprised at how many thousands of creatures are sharing your little plot of land.
I know. That's what's so fascinating is it's when you spend the time to look closely around you, there's so many little things, like just watch. I had a conversation with someone. I think they thought I was a little bit crazy, but I said, "Have you ever stopped and watched ants?" And they looked at me and I said, "No, really." It's really interesting to watch how they interact, or even pigeons. Most people can't stand pigeons, but when you watch pigeons, you could sit in a park, you could sit in Central Park, you could sit wherever you are in Boston Common, in any street, you're going to find a pigeon. Mm-hmm. And they're funny, they can be, I get it. They steal food. They are a little bit of a nuisance to a large degree here and there, but they're really interesting to watch. And there is stuff everywhere. I mean, if you look at it, just looking at a tree, and it doesn't even have to be an animal. If you look at a tree and you think, how amazing, this huge tree that is giving me shade right now has grown up from this teeny tiny little seed, and it's managed to withstand the elements and has grown into this incredible giant, just, strong, powerful thing that's protecting me from getting a sunburn right now.
Yeah.
There is so much. I mean, and I think that's a big thing for me. It's not just, I obviously wrote it from South Africa because I was in South Africa, and that's where everything happened. But that's an important thing for me and that's one of the things that I'm trying to work on with pairing the music and my photography and artwork and writing with a lot of education stuff. One of the organizations that I'm working with that's what we're about. I want to bring kids back outdoors. Technology is what it is. It's not going anywhere, but I would like to get kids off of their tech, or even if they can incorporate their tech, but bring it outside so that they are back out there breathing for the fresh air and appreciating this world around them, because it's incredible. And, I'd love, my goal is to get more kids outside and appreciating this kind of stuff. And especially the little things that we tend to take for granted or we just overlook because we're not even aware it's there.
I think there's so many benefits to that. I mean, obviously getting out and being in the fresh air is one thing, but helping our kids become calm, helping our kids become aware of their surroundings. There are so many kids who aren't aware of, they don't look up from their screens long enough. But also the thing you were talking about, looking at a tree and understanding that tree started as a little acorn and grew into this massive thing. And I think it can help us start to look at all the systems that we're interacting with, that our kids are interacting with, that little tech that they have in their hands. There are a lot of people came together, worked together to make that thing, to make it, and then to make it work. And,
right.
and hopefully it's a way for us to help our kids connect with nature and also help us understand how we really are connected with each other and in this world.
Yeah. I mean, the connection is, I remember when I first moved out to South Africa, probably about a year in, I worked at a camp where we trained field guides that took everyone out on safari, and I ran the camp, and we had instructors that would come in and teach specific courses. One of them was tracking. I would teach stuff on telemetry, which is basically tracking using radio frequencies and a GPS. And then we had people that would actually track by looking at the prints in the sand, and learning what to look for, like when the branches are broken, what the type of tree it is, what kind of animal that might mean. But one of the teachers that came in taught me one of the most fantastic, and it's a simple lesson, but it's one of those things I think you just forget, and that's the connectedness. We're connected to each other, but also connected to everything else around us. And it's almost like, it's like a computer with all the wiring, and it's like our central nervous system to a large degree. They're all a sense of connection. And he put a whole, 6 objects in a circle, 6 what looked like completely random objects. And he said, okay, now I want everyone to find ways that these are all connected. And I was like, what an interesting sort of game to play and lesson, because you could see a plastic ring that was, when you open a bottle and there's that little tiny plastic ring that gets left over. One of those was there. And then there was, a branch from this, and then there was a piece of wire, and we could find ways to connect every single thing. And it was really fascinating to sit down and say, okay, all these disparate elements that don't seem like they should combine or they should make any sense together, they all fit together somehow. And I think it's a really valuable lesson, not just in our connectedness and the value that comes from knowing that we are connected to things and we're never alone. And there's always a sense of camaraderie to some degree, and not just with humans, but across species. We're all in it together, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But also to show that when we're overdoing it, that there are repercussions to that. So when we're over-consuming stuff, or we're not paying attention to where we throw our trash, or we're just wasting things, mm-hmm. that also has repercussions. So it goes so many different ways, and it's such a valuable teaching tool, but also a good tool in general. Just it's like a feel-good kind of tool too, to realize that again, great, amazing world full of amazing things, people, places, animals, and then the tools that they're using are fantastic. But they come from somewhere and they go somewhere, and us being cognizant of how that affects everything else, including ourselves, is also incredibly valuable.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's really valuable. One of the things I love about your story is that you've had dreams, and you still have dreams, and you're still working and working on making your dreams come true. And I think that's such an important lesson for our kids. There's so many studies out there that show that kids who have dreams and goals they make better decisions, they're happier, they do better in school. And I was really shocked when I first read those stories. I started asking kids at who are attending my magic shows that, how many of you guys have dreams? Do you think when I grow up I want to do this or that? And the highest percentage that I ever had in my audience, it was about half of the kids raised their hands. And it shocked me, but it also really saddened me that there are a lot of kids out there who aren't dreaming. And so I think it's that they think sharing Santiago's story and sharing your story is a great way to encourage our kids to dream, and a great way to remind ourselves that no matter how old we are, we can still dream.
Well, I think that, honestly, I get this is sort of a cultural criticism, but I find that, and I think I lived in South Africa, I've also lived in Australia, and I lived about 2 months in Costa Rica as well, a long time ago. And I've been all over the country, and I find that there's a sort of a cohesive cultural feeling that we have to, and I've been seeing it more and more. I have a lot of nieces and nephews, and watching them sort of struggle through everything. We kind of have a culture that, as much as we say you can do and be whatever you want, we also kind of poo-poo them doing exactly that. We tell them they must do this and they must achieve and they must, which is valuable, but there's so much value in stepping back and just taking the time to daydream and to really connect with because when you daydream, you start thinking about the stuff that matters to you. And when you take that and you build that into a career, that's when you make a happy life. Because you're doing something that it's meaningful to you, and so you're putting your best foot forward, and you're giving your best self to the world, which just, in an idealized way, but in reality, I've seen it happen, makes it for a better world. Mm-hmm. We have a habit of telling our kids not to dream, instead to just be realistic and do this. The fact of the matter is, in a lot of ways, nothing's ever realistic. Mm-hmm. The bottom can drop out at any time to some degree, which sounds very pessimistic, but it's not. It's the reality. So if you're going to go in and be a hedge fund manager, that's fantastic. If that's what your dream is, go for it. But if you're going into it because you think that's a steady, comfortable, whatever career, and you're always going to be set for life, at any given time, that market could, we have no idea what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And so to look at it from the perspective of it's safe is understandable, and I can imagine every parent wants their child to be safe, which makes sense. But to not allow them, and for me too, my mom wanted me to be a dentist, and I was like, that's just not going to happen. And one of my closest friends is a children's dentist, and he's amazing, but he's also a musician and a photographer, and he does things that he loves. And that's been his means to an end. But he loves what he does as a dentist as well. But for me, I was like, no, I have an abject fear of halitosis. I can't. There's no way. But I'm also a super outdoors person. I needed to be outside. And so I didn't know how to, and she wanted me to do that because she said, well, 2 days, 3 days a week, you'll have time for your kids. And I'm like, what kids? I don't have any kids. And the reasoning behind it was they wanted me to have a safe life, and they wanted me to be, secure. And my experience has been, no matter how safe you think you are, you never know what's going to happen. And as terrifying as that can be, it's also so liberating, because the reality is anything is available to you. It's just a question of finding what matters to you and figuring out ways to turn that into a life. And the thing that I have learned is there are so many people that are out there willing to help you. You just have to ask, which took a long time for me to get. But now that I'm getting there, my life has become a lot easier to a large degree, because there's any fewer struggles. It's just easier to deal with, because I know I can ask people for help when I'm struggling, and I do. I can reach out a hand, and I think that's part of the problem, is that we're telling kids, we're pushing them and putting so much pressure on them that they have to go to this school, and they have to do this, and they have to pursue this kind of a life, and they must become this, and the reality is that's not everybody. Mm-hmm. And some people are really happy, and they want a white picket fence, and they want a comfortable home and a dog and 2.5 kids, and that's awesome. And if that's what they want, that's great. But to pigeonhole someone who doesn't want that life and foist it upon them and make them feel like they're not good enough if that's not the life that they want, that's not going to do anyone any favors, particularly not that child.
Yeah. Amen.
So, yeah. So I'm a big proponent of, you do what you love, and you can find a way. And it's not to make it easy, to say that it's easy. It's not at all. I will be the first person to tell you that I have gone through a lot of struggle to get anywhere in doing what I was doing. But at the same time, I love what I do. And I don't want to do anything else, because I love what I do. And yes, I've made sacrifices. Yes, I don't have a big fancy home. I have a 15-year-old car. But I don't care. Because that to me is not important. What's important to me is I love that I get to be able to reach people, and I get to be able to help people, and I get to be able to help the planet, and I get to be able to express my art and do the things that I love to do, and connect. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's more important than anything. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, again, you have a trade-off. I have to be on the road a lot, which is not ideal to some degree, because it gets tiring of packing in. I mean, I literally got home from this music festival and packed the next day. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm leaving for today. It was supposed to be yesterday, but not today, for a week. And then when I come back, I'm literally home for 3 hours, and then I go to Philadelphia for another music festival / a literary thing. And I'm back for 3 days, and then I'm going to be in, it's crazy, and it's fun. It's amazing to be able to see these places, but at some point you're just like, I really would like to sleep in my own bed for a week. It would be nice. It would be so awesome. I get very excited when there's a washing machine. Like, you don't even understand. I mean, there are certain things in life that I've taken for granted that now when I see them, I'm like, oh my God, there's a coffee machine here. I don't even have to make my own coffee. It's funny. It's very funny what you start to appreciate and care about. Mm-hmm. But those are the trade-offs. Like I said, I trade off the fact that I cannot be in one place all the time because that's not a part of my job. But because I travel as much as I do, I'm able to connect with people from all over the world. I'm able to feel like I'm actually affecting change on a larger scale. I get to meet people from all these different cultures, which then informs my art because I realize, I haven't even thought about that. Like, that's a really interesting way of looking at something. And I just feel like, I don't know. People think I'm like, you're so idealistic. I'm like, no, I'm really not at all. I've just learned to love what I do and like love where I'm at.
And I think that's really important. And I love that you're talking about choices and trade-offs and making choices. And I think that's important for us to share with our kids, that yes, you can have that, but in order to have that, it means these are some of the choices you're going to make, and these are some things you might not be able to have, and that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Well, I mean, that was, for me growing up as a kid, that was the kind of thing. It was like, if you want to do that, you can do that. That's open to you. But it's going to mean you can't do this. Mm-hmm. Just because you can't do both at the same. And it wasn't that you can't do both because I wasn't allowed to. It was just simply time or whatever. There were actual literal constraints that precluded me from being able to do both. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, well then I'm going to make the choice because this matters more to me. And this, and the choices are there and we can do them. And I think that's something that we need to impart on our kids. And I think kids are sometimes afraid to make choices because they're worried they're going to make the wrong one. And it's like, there really is never a wrong choice. And it never ends maybe it doesn't end the way you think it'll end. Right. But even the choices that are quote unquote the right choices are not, my first job when I was in college, I was lucky enough to be in college in DC. And my first job was at National Geographic, working for Explorer. And, I used to joke about being the National Geographic photojournalist. And I was like, yeah, but I got to work at National Geographic. I ended up doing it. Mm-hmm. And then my photography when I was in South Africa, and even still gets used by NGOs, some of which ends up with National Geographic. So by default, I am doing what I said I was going to do, but it might not be the way I thought I was going to be doing it. Mm-hmm. And it took a roundabout way, and I'm okay with that because sometimes what you think you're going to be doing or what you think you want to be doing, when you end up doing it, you're like, no, this is not what I want. And then you find other ways to work with it. So.
No, I think that those are all really, really valuable lessons, and especially the last one you're sharing. There's so many kids who, we were talking about the music industry earlier. They're like, I want to be in the music industry, but for them, they think that means famous Lady Gaga, and if they don't get to that level, then they're a failure. When in reality, it's like, if you love music and you love performing, you love expressing yourself, and you're able to do that and make a living at it, you've succeeded, no matter if you're Lady Gaga level or, touring the country in the station wagon.
Oh, yeah, and there's so many. The thing is, there's also, when you learn the industry, and that's probably the best advice I could give anyone as a kid, is like, just study the industry you're interested in, because there are so many different ways you could be involved. I mean, I did voiceover work. When I was in South Africa, I had a friend in Cape Town, and when I was in town, which wasn't that often, but when I was in town, I'd call him and ask him when if he needed anyone to just be a session singer. And I remember I had to sing a Zulu lullaby for a Pampers commercial. Like, you picked the white girl from the U.S. Like, you couldn't find a Zulu in South Africa. But it was just, I was there. I could do it easily because I was used to, having to hit the target in a 5-minute session. And so I get to do things, and you might not see my face all over the place. You might not, which I'm actually kind of okay with.
Yeah.
But there are so many opportunities. Like, you could be you want to be an actor? You could be a voiceover artist, which is the greatest thing in the world because you can show up in your pajamas. You could even sometimes do stuff from home once you have the tech. You don't even have to necessarily go into anything. And I have a good friend who does a ton of voiceover work, and that's a mainstay of his income. And he's also a touring artist, but he's been multiple characters on Family Guy. He's been in Happy Feet. And he loves it. He's like, this is the greatest gig ever. He's like, I get paid to basically just talk. And it's like, there are so many different ways of going about things in an industry that you might be interested in. Like, as a musician, you don't have to be, maybe you want to be a Lady Gaga, and that's something to work towards. But if you don't necessarily care about that, there are so many other ways to go about it without, you're never a failure if you try. That's my attitude too.
Absolutely.
If your steps, like, not even steps, you're miles ahead of all the people that just sit on the couch and don't try.
Absolutely.
So, go however you get there. If you want to start out in musical theater, get on stage. There are so many local theaters, and that gives you the comfort level of being on stage in front of people. That builds your confidence, and working in a team, because you have to work in a team in theater. There's so many things out there that, even people talk to me about the music industry, and what if you're not a performer? Well, you can be a music attorney. You could be a licensing person. I have people who are friends who are music supervisors. They're not musicians, but they pick all the music that goes into film and TV shows. Because they love music, but they're completely tone deaf. And they're like, I don't want to be a musician, but I love music and I want to help musicians. And this is valuable to me. There are so many ways of going about it. And again, it's all about just being able to manage your expectations and adapt. You pave your own way to a large degree, and that's great. But at the same time, also be aware that there's stuff out there. You just have to be willing to look.
Well, there's so much in this episode that we've shared with parents, and I know there's things I'm going to go back and listen to over again because it's been a fascinating conversation. Where can folks go to learn more about Santiago and also more about Jennifer Vitanzo?
So my publishing company, which does my book publishing, my music publishing, and my photography, it's called Late Shift Media. So it's www.lateshiftmedia.com. So as opposed to the early shift, it's the late shift. You'll find information on the book there as well, or you can go to santiagobugbook.com. There is a Facebook page specifically for Santiago, and it's facebook.com/a-little-bug-in-a-big-world. And you'll be able to find pretty much everything you need there. The book is available on Amazon, so you can order it also through Amazon. I'm not sure what the direct link is, but if you do a search for Santiago, True Tales of a Little Bug in a Big World, it will come up. There's a Kindle version and the paperback version. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Awesome.
On the web.
Well, we've had such a great time speaking to the author of Santiago, True Tales of a Little Bug in a Big World, Jennifer Vitanzo. Jennifer, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Jed. I really appreciate it.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be our friend, Donna Sager-Cowan. She's going to let us know about the brand new addition to her Superhero School series. The new book is called With the Curiosity of a Cat. It is coming to us in November. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Jennifer Vitanzo, thank you so very much. Be sure to check out Santiago, True Tales of a Little Bug in a Big World. I want to thank my producer, Fatima Khan, for all that she does for me. Be sure to check out her blog at readingwithyourkids.com. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all of the support she gives me. I want to thank in advance all of you who are going to join me at Rochester Fringe Festival. At Jedley's Totally Interactive Magic Circus is presented at the Joseph Avenue Arts and Cultural Alliance on September 14th at 3 p.m. It is absolutely free. And, of course, I want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to make the world a better place. And you do that every time you read with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.